Well, hey, everybody, I'm Phil Heimlich. I am a former assistant prosecutor, Cincinnati City Council member, county commissioner. Don't hold those jobs against me. This is Sanity Check. This is our podcast. And once again, I know a lot of you are saying, Phil, you're the last person to be hosting something called Sanity Check. Well, okay, but that's just the way it is. Anyway, today we've got a really interesting guest. Donovan O'Neill is the Ohio director of Americans for Prosperity. Now, some of you may not know what Americans for Prosperity is, but let me tell you, it is one of maybe the most influential grassroots organization in this country. Uh, they're dedicated, and he's going to talk more about this, for fighting for the principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence. For some issues, they're able to flood our members of Congress with sometimes a million messages one way or the other. So Donovan has a very, really important organization. And Donovan, welcome to the podcast.
Phil, pleasure to be with you. Always good to be talking to folks in Southwest Ohio, but I think this gets out beyond that reach as well. So pleasure to be with you.
All right, great. Yeah, and I'm a little more interested, I think we are, because we have people all over, not just in Ohio, talking a little more about AFP from a national perspective. But first of all, tell us a little about your background, particularly in politics.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Northeast Ohio. Youngstown's what I call home. We moved around a little bit when I was a kid, but Youngstown, the Mahoning Valley is home. Graduated from Youngstown State University, married my then girlfriend, now wife, Michelle. We had 3 kids, lived in Toledo for a little bit, and then Columbus, and now Mansfield, Ohio. But really got my start, quite frankly, in 2004. I was homeschooled, Phil, and one of the I joke, I tricked my parents into letting me get extra credit to go volunteer at the Bush Cheney Victory Center during the 2004 election. I was 16, right. And I was like, hey, I'd rather do this than write another report for my mom or have to do more math. And,
your mom was probably a pretty tough taskmaster, I would guess.
I think they actually tricked me. The thing I've come to learn is they actually kind of tricked me into learning. But
okay, all right.
What I found in that, right? When you're a young volunteer, and you're for either whatever the political party is, right? But if you're a young person who's ready to get involved and volunteer and be involved at that grassroots level very passionately, you're a king, right? So I was showered with all the pizza, soda, volunteer opportunities I could get my hands on. And I was like, you know what, I want to figure out how to do what that guy over there at running the Victory Center's job is, because this seems like a pretty good gig. And so I just say from there, got involved in college Republicans, young Republicans, always just more conservative. Happy to talk about that if that's where you want to go with the conversation as well. But yeah, just really conservative. Was lucky as a Republican. Those of your listeners who've been following Ohio politics for a while know in 2010, Republicans swept the state. Prior to that, we were very much a purple state, a battleground state. Republicans swept the state, and I had the opportunity to go work for a congressional office, then work for the state auditor. And that's what kind of took me and my wife around the state. And then for the last 10 years, a little over 10 years now, I've been working in a variety of roles with Americans for Prosperity here in Ohio and across the country, and having a blast doing it.
Well, you said you live in Mansfield, is that right?
Mm-hmm. I do.
I was there one time, and I saw that that incredible prison from, what's the movie?
Shawshank Redemption.
Shawshank Redemption. I mean, this building it's an unbelievable thing to see. I mean, I got to drive up to it, but I didn't have time to go through the tour. Next time I got to do that. It just looks like a cool thing.
It is something else. And they do a really neat, if you're into heavy metal or rock music concert scene, they do a really awesome 3-day music festival there that includes tours of the prison. And it's just, it's pretty amazing.
Wow. That is cool. And you mentioned kids working in campaigns. We had this thing when I was on Cincinnati City Council that a lot of the schools would basically give the kids credit or require them to work in campaigns. So we, of course, use that as a lever over them, besides the pizza and the pop, to extract as much labor as we could out of them. But all right, let's talk about Americans for Prosperity. A lot of people may not even know it, even though it is an incredibly influential organization. Talk about how it was founded and how it works now, the different kind of areas that it operates in.
Yeah, well, we describe ourselves as one of the nation's the largest conservative grassroots advocacy organizations. Been operating a little over 20 years now across the country. We operate in all 50 states. Ohio, we have a few states though that get a larger assignment of staff. Ohio is among them. We're, I think, the third largest staff in the nation. And so with that organization, what it has enabled us to do over the years, right? Like any organization, we've grown and transformed with the environment, the times, and it's something that's core to the beliefs that we have as an organization. Is this idea of continual transformation. And what it's enabled us to do, right, is regardless of whether a Republican or a Democrat is in control of Washington or a particular state capital, we have the opportunity, right, to put a megaphone to the voices, especially here in Ohio, of Ohioans who want to make a difference, who want to either who voted maybe for somebody who they like, right, a conservative and Senate conservative majority of Washington, D.C., this most recent election. We give them an opportunity to follow through, not just have their action end on election day, but now go hold their elected officials accountable to the policies they said they were going to do, whether it's lowering taxes or cutting red tape or empowering families with school choice. If it's a year where maybe the election didn't go a particular way for our volunteers or how our organization would envision it, we have the opportunity, right, to hold that other party accountable, right? But again, it all comes down to, Phil, at the end of the day, we put a megaphone to the voices of folks who want to make a difference. And it is incredibly fulfilling work. And it gives us the opportunity really to help folks move from throwing their shoe at the TV or waving their fist at a politician at a town hall meeting to actually putting their passion, their energy into action in positive ways that actually results in real public policy change.
Now, AFP was founded by, wasn't it the Koch brothers, who are kind of well-known political supporters and benefactors, philanthropists? Is that correct?
Yeah, Charles and David Koch were some of the original donors who helped bring a group of philanthropists together to help support our efforts. Over the years, it's sort of also transformed into, we're part of the larger, what's known as Stand Together community, and that I'm happy to get a little philosophical and talk a little bit about some of the bigger vision that Stand Together and our organization has. But in short, right, our group is focused on being that grassroots army for within the larger Stand Together community, advancing these ideas of a free and prosperous society.
Okay, now there's two kind of sides of your organization in terms of affecting supporting political campaigns, right? You've got what we call the C4, and this is a technical kind of IRS thing, but basically you have one side we'll call the C4, okay, which is, as I understand, basically, well, it's a C4, okay, and the other is a super PAC. All right, now without getting in the weeds too much, let's boil it down. If somebody gives money to super PAC, that is disclosed on the FEC website. Okay, so if you give people know. The C4, which is described by some as dark money. Okay, I'm not making that characterization, but basically people can give to that, and you can use it to influence elections without the donor's name being disclosed, correct? Now, the criticism that is told is that, well, the problem here is that somebody who could have a financial interest in an issue or a political interest or whatever could give millions without anyone knowing that they were the ones who put the money behind it. What's your response to that?
Well, I think our nation was founded around the idea of donor privacy, around the idea of individuals having the right to go out and engage in the public square through organizations in speech, and sometimes speech against the actions that their government's taking. Right, if you go back to our founding fathers. In that way, right, against the King of England. But I think the work that we're doing now, right, the work that we do at Americans for Prosperity, because we'll get that accusation levied at us by lawmakers we're holding accountable. And the thing I always point out is, you're lawmaker so and so, you're talking to me right now. You know exactly who it is that is educating your constituents, who is mobilizing volunteers to not.
But you don't know who's giving the money behind it, right? I mean, correct?
Unless those donors disclose themselves or feel free to, which of course they're always welcome to do. But at the end of the day, our work, right, is elevating the grassroots communities around the state around a policy agenda that's available at buckeyeblueprint.com. And,
Mhm.
we're pretty clear about the work that we're doing, the work we're wanting to get done. And we're blessed that there are a lot of folks who, one, are willing to part with a portion of their wealth from $5 to much, much more than that to help us be able to go do that. And at the end of the day, it's not me getting to go out. Well, I get to go out and do it, but it's me and my team having the ability to go out and do it with fellow Ohioans who otherwise wouldn't have the ability to visit the state house and talk to their elected official about the need for school choice or lower taxes, or have the ability to organize a town hall in their elected official's district and bring that elected official out to hear from other constituents who want to see red tape reduction or energy abundance happen in the state. And so really at the end of the day provides an opportunity and a platform for Ohioans, not just in Ohio, but across the country through our organization's footprint, the ability to make a difference and be a part of the public process, rather than what we see so much today of people feeling like that it's too far away, it's too distant, it's too complex, it's not for them, just leave it to the experts. We give people the opportunity to be the experts through the grassroots advocacy that we do here at AFP.
Okay, tell us about, I know there's a range of them and I want to talk about some, but tell us about the issues that are most important to AFP. I know you guys, for example, don't get into foreign policy and stuff, but there are some that are central to you. And I'll just interrupt by saying, I know one is school choice, and I am grateful for your work in that. I started a bunch of charter schools when I was on city council before, when we didn't have vouchers. And I've been a huge supporter of the voucher program, and I'm so glad that Ohio has expanded it as other states have. But given that, give us a rundown of some of the issues that are kind of most important to AFP.
Yeah, well, actually, just to back it up a little bit, a few years ago, I stepped into this role. We brought our team together and we said, hey, gang, we've got an opportunity here. And this is shortly coming out of the COVID craziness, right? We said, we've got an opportunity here as a leading grassroots organization to build a vision for the state of Ohio that can move us forward, right? You look at these state rankings: rich states, poor states, freedom in the 50 states, USA News and World Report. No matter what you're looking at, left, right, and in between, Ohio consistently is middle of the pack. When what we said is we ought to be number one in the nation, right? We should be number one in the nation when it comes to lower taxes. Yet states like Texas, Tennessee, and Florida have a 0% income tax. A few years ago, when we launched our campaign, we looked at education opportunities. States like Iowa and about 2 hours and 15 minutes south and across the Ohio River from where I'm sitting right now, they have the Hope Scholarship, empowering families and students with school choice, not bureaucrats. And red tape and regulations were bogged down and burdened. Yet we had at that point Republican leadership who talk about being business friendly, who talk about cutting regulations and red tape for 15 years, and we hadn't made a dent in the red wall that is Columbus and its bureaucratic state. And so we put together our Buckeye Blueprint. That's our vision, Phil, for a bolder, better Buckeye state. It's how we move Ohio from what we would say is middle in the Midwest to number one in the nation. And it's really focused around 4 key policy areas. And I don't just sit in my office and come up with these or ask a few of my team to come up with them. We actually go out there and we annually solicit feedback from our grassroots communities, holding roundtables and listening tours. And so our Buckeye Blueprint, though, is 4 issue areas that we've sort of identified as the tip of the spear, the opportunity to make a difference. It's economic opportunity, that's your sort of taxes, income tax, property tax, regulations and red tape bucket. We want to expand education opportunities, so that's your school choice, and making sure that we're creating and removing barriers that are creating challenges for families who want to put their kid in the school that best meets that child's needs. Energy abundance. We believe that here in Ohio, we have the opportunity to be an energy abundant state. And when you talk to Ohioans about affordability, energy prices continue to be one of the top tier issues that are challenging them day in and day out, let alone manufacturers and businesses who are looking to bring jobs to the state. Energy abundance is the solution to that problem. And then finally, a little bit of a newer area, but one that we see at the heart of why there is such a property tax crisis in the state, is we believe we need to modernize Ohio government. There's work to be done in Columbus, to be sure, but we have the 6th most political subdivisions in the nation, Phil. Depending on how you count them or slice and dice them, 3,900 plus political subdivisions. These are your cities, townships, villages, school districts,
Like in
counties.
Cincinnati, when I was in public office, I mean, there were like 50 police departments because each township or whatever had one. So go ahead.
Well, and we're unique in that. You talk to colleagues from a lot of other
Mm,
states. We are very unique in that. Pennsylvania, to our east, right, is very similar.
mm.
But if you go to Florida, I think they have somewhere around 60 some, 70 um, school districts, right? All organized by county. We're here in Ohio. I think we're at 640 some, 620 some school districts, depending on how you're counting ESCs and others and otherwise. The reality is the structure that we have in our local government, what you would call local government, political subdivisions in the state, is choking out innovation. It's making living in Ohio more expensive, and it's inhibiting our ability to really truly be a competitive state in the 50 state union that we call these United States of America. And so those are our four areas: economic opportunity, education opportunity, energy abundance, and then working to modernize Ohio government, all in the pursuit of moving Ohio in a bolder, more transformative way.
I pulled out a few. I was looking over some of your not your stuff, meaning AFP, not necessarily Ohio. And I know these are a little more nationally related, but in fairness, there's a lot of people who listen to this who, as I said, aren't from Ohio. So I'll give you the burden of somehow speaking on behalf of the whole organization. You can use any disclaimer you want. But I noticed that one of the things that AFP stands for is to oppose restrictions on freedom of speech. And
Sure.
I want to ask you about that particular issue because there has been somewhat of an effort by the FCC to kind of try to regulate political content. The president has said that he thinks that, but whether it's Jimmy Kimmel or any of these people, where they're always against him, that they should lose their license. And we've had a couple situations. One is the Kimmel thing, where the head of the FCC, Brendan Carr, said, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, meaning either you take him off the air or we're going to take away your license, that kind of thing. And just today, Stephen Colbert uh, announced that he was told by his lawyers that you can't have James Tallarico, who's a Democratic Senate candidate, and can't have him on because it's going to upset the FCC. There's a couple other things, then I'll let you respond. There's also a couple of lawsuits that were filed by President Trump in his personal capacity against CBS for some 60 Minutes thing and against ABC for some interview. In fairness, most people who are in the legal profession like me would say they were totally frivolous suits, and yet they were settled for about $16 million each because the parent companies of these networks were trying to merge and needed FCC approval. And I guess what I'm saying is this something that AFP would get involved in? Because it seems to me that there is clearly a chilling effect going on here when the FCC starts, threatening to take people's licenses away or deny a merger because of the political beliefs you express.
Yeah, I can't speak to all of those specific issues, but I think in general the way that we look at free speech and the way that we are free. I would describe our organization as being free speech absolutists, right? The idea
Yeah.
where we often find a lot of friction, especially as a grassroots organization, whether it's canvassing in communities or organizing events that'll have a variety of voices in the audience sharing their thoughts. We look at, we run into a lot of times where folks say, I disagree with the way what that person is saying, or I don't like what that person is saying, or I don't want, why are they here if they don't have any, if they don't agree with us? And the thing that will, oftentimes challenges is, well, that's actually good, right? That's healthy. That's one of the things that we need more of in this country, right? Is that diversity of dialogue to be able to build more understanding, engage people where they are and be able to move them. One of the mantras I embrace a lot as well is the idea of disagreeing without being disagreeable, right? In that,
Sure.
we can have a difference of opinion on policy issues or who you're going to vote for or not vote for. But at the end of the day, what we need to kind of ground a lot of the work we do back into is, the foundational principles that make this country great, that our founding fathers embraced, that set us on this 250-year journey to where we are today as a country. And so now the challenge is, you're kind of pointing out there with some of those scenarios I think you're given, Phil, right, is that free speech challenges aren't unique to one party or another. It's an ever-present threat that exists, right? Whenever
Yeah,
anyone is.
but just is AFP, or you have a lot of influence, meaning AFP does, with many members of Congress. Are you guys, and I mean the whole entity, making any effort to encourage our elected representatives to kind of speak up or speak out, or pass a law to stop what's going on here, where the FCC is basically threatening people to lose your license if you don't, so-called make equal, political views, which to me is totally contrary to the First Amendment. Is that something
Sure.
you guys might get involved in?
It could be. I'll be honest with you, Phil. I'm not involved in that. That's not something we're working on here in the Ohio State chapter. But I'd be happy to connect you with somebody in our team who works on a lot of that and spends a lot of time on the Hill. They may be more involved in that work than we are here in the Buckeye State.
Okay, and another thing, kind of along these lines, is that as you know, the Trump administration has basically ordered the Smithsonian and a bunch of other museums that get federal money, obviously, as well as all the national parks, to kind of take down mentions of slavery and things that are a bit unpleasant in American history. And the Smithsonian was required to take down stuff about the Trump impeachment. Same kind of thing. Is that something that you guys would be concerned about?
I haven't seen us make any statement on that to this point. I think again, the idea here is that we want to remain ever vigilant about, who, what our elected officials are doing. I think also, it's a whenever I hear something like that, what I always point out to folks is this is why you always want to be conscious about taking those federal or state dollars, right? And that's one of
Right.
the things that we've seen in the community sector so often is folks going to Columbus or going to their congressman and saying, will you give me grant dollars? Will you give me tax dollars to fund this museum or this investment or this community program? And they're all great programs, right? But the challenge there is taxpayers from the get-go shouldn't be, my belief would be, is they shouldn't be funding those things, right? That is for the community to do. That is for philanthropists and donors and supporters to be able to do. And whenever you get in bed with the federal government or the state government or any government in general, right?
Yeah.
You're dependent upon the whims of one administration or another. And I think at the end of the day, that is, if anything, it's a wake up call or a reminder for folks that, that's really not what I think. If I were to talk, I would imagine the founding fathers would look at that and say, that's not really what we envisioned as a proper role of government and society.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on that. I don't support. I don't like the fact that the Trump administration is trying to pressure Harvard and these other schools into their admissions policy, whatever the heck it is. But I totally agree. Those schools, if they didn't take government money, they could tell them to just, take a jump. You know what I mean? I once visited Hillsdale College, which is in Michigan, and I really was impressed because they take no government money. And I think that's the way it ought to be in education. So certainly agree with you on that. Let's talk about healthcare, because I've actually had a chance to listen to, I listened to a couple podcasts where you talked about it. So I know it's something that you have an interest in, as well as AFP. My sense is your position, or that of AFP, is really to get the government out of the healthcare business. Is that kind of fair to say?
Well, what we would
Or
describe
you can elaborate a little.
Yeah, well, because I think it's a little more than that, and I think the way we look at it is we want to drive personal options in healthcare, and it's a direct counterbalance to where we see a lot of the country sliding towards, which is a public option in healthcare. And so the idea behind a personal options are really to empower patients and their healthcare providers with the choices they need to be able to deliver the healthcare that so many Americans deserve. And we have actually a campaign for that. You can visit personaloption.org to learn more about that. Those are your listeners who want to know more. But it's the answer that I think so many folks have been looking for, and understanding how do we make healthcare more personal? How do we make it more affordable? And how do we ultimately avoid it becoming the drain on our tax dollars that it hasn't become in so many ways?
If I was to pick the program that kind of reflects the greatest amount of government control and single payer and all that, and money, is Medicare. Do you believe that the government should end Medicare, or slowly, or phase it out?
Well, let me switch to another one with Medicaid. When you look at that at the state level, right, that is the number one expenditure at the state level. And so you can look at, you talk to lawmakers in Columbus about different levers that could be pulled to bring down the cost of government or provide more tax relief to citizens here in the state of Ohio. The challenge is a lot of it's tied up in Medicaid, and a lot of it's tied up in I think, fraud, waste, and abuse. I was talking with representative from Northeast Ohio, and of course his name is going to slip my mind here in a moment. It'll come back to me. But one of the things that was included in the budget was a performance audit, requiring Keith Faber, the auditor of state's office, to do a performance audit of the Medicaid department here in the state of Ohio to try to identify efficiencies and address some fraud concerns that State Representative, apologies for that, State Representative Mike DeVille is the representative who championed this, had identified in an investigation he had done. But it's like, my understanding and talking with him the other day is it's like pulling teeth to get that department to get moving, to give the auditor of state what they're looking for. And so what at the end of the day we would want to see happen, right, is that those social safety net programs like Medicaid, Medicare, and otherwise are able to deliver services for the people who are most in need of them. But the problem is, right, Phil, is so many of these programs are becoming catch-all programs for everybody. And so that net, to continue with that safety net analogy, right, is being spread so thin that people fall literally through the safety net, or we're going to get to a point where it's unsustainable for those who need it the most. And so if we want to bring down the cost of healthcare, if we want to make it more affordable for Americans, the answer isn't more subsidies. It isn't going further down the path of Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act. It's really embracing this idea of affordability through personal options and empowering Americans with the choices they need around healthcare, not some bureaucrat in Columbus or DC to make those choices and set those formulas for them.
I want to ask you about Obamacare. I know AFP has been basically opposed to Obamacare, correct? And when there were a couple votes, I think in the first Trump administration, to try to, something in
repeal and replace.
Repeal and replace. Yeah, exactly. A question. Do you think if you go back to our healthcare system before Obamacare, do you think that was a better system than with Obamacare?
Well, I think we're apples to oranges, and I don't think that was a good system either in a lot of ways, right? But the thing that many of us said, and this was when I, really started to get involved in politics, 08, 09, 2010, when this all happened, what we were saying at that time has come to be true, that the play wasn't to actually make healthcare more affordable. In fact, you can look at, any sort of statistics out there. Healthcare prices have gone up and skyrocketed since the Affordable Care Act was put into place. The goal there was to actually break the American healthcare system and ultimately push our country towards a single payer type or government funded system. It's where we are basically, in a lot of ways today because of the subsidies that are, pumped in to prop up the current marketplace exchange. And the answer from Democrats, our friends in the Democrat aisle on this, has just been more of the same. And unfortunately, our friends on the Republican side, rather than embracing ideas like the personal option, either by our Democrat friends' lines, approach hook, line, and sinker, or worse yet, just try to stay away from the issue. I think we need to embrace it. I think we need to embrace it. And the idea, President Trump actually has done a great job in I think pushing forward on this and pointing out, we need to empower patients with health savings accounts, right? Put more Americans in control of their healthcare buying power rather than putting that money into healthcare premiums. I don't know how familiar you are with HSAs, but it's pretty powerful stuff.
Before Obamacare, as you remember, you're a young guy, maybe you don't remember, but if you were self-employed, like a guy I know who's a kickboxing trainer, okay, who has all kinds of major issues, health issues. He's got diverticulitis. He's got blood pressure, just all kinds of stuff. That kind of person couldn't get insurance before Obamacare. Now there's a requirement that you can't use pre-existing conditions. Do you at least support that? Or do you think that the insurance company should be free to turn people down if they have pre-existing conditions?
Well, I think one of the flaws in that, no, I don't think you should be able to turn people down, but I think one of the flaws that we're sort of stuck in, and we need to have a transformational way of thinking about this is insurance doesn't equal healthcare, right? How many people have healthcare insurance, but can't actually go and afford the healthcare that they want? The flaw, the flaw in the thinking there that so many people have is that insurance equals care. It's what our friends in the Democrat aisle believe, right? Is if everybody had insurance, well, the insurance companies would just be really rich. The problem, right, but the reality is what we need to do is empower patients to be able to be in control, Americans to be able to be in control of their healthcare decisions, not third parties like health insurance companies, and worse yet, not third parties like bureaucrats in Washington and Columbus. And so I think part of it is, and that's why our team launched that personal option campaign at personaloption.org, is to begin to challenge the way of thinking around healthcare and actually drive towards policy solutions that will increase abundance in the healthcare marketplace while also empowering patients and their healthcare professionals to be back in control of that decision
Okay,
making.
I want to talk about the personal option, but one thing before that, you guys, meaning AFP, supported the repeal and replace votes, which I think fell one vote short or something like that. Here's the thing I don't get. At the time, and I think today as well, they had no system to replace it. In fact, President Trump's been claiming for about 8 or 10 years we're coming up with a health care plan in a couple days or a couple weeks. But in fairness, at the time they voted, they had no plan to replace it. So how do you justify encouraging congressmen and senators that you support to repeal something when there's nothing to take its place?
Well, I mean, I think that's why that ultimately failed, right? Was the idea that there wasn't a real clear path forward, or at least a path that you could get Republican consensus on. And, unfortunately, voters, if I go back to that time where that happened, voters elected Republicans on the promise to fix healthcare and fix the rising costs of Obamacare. Republican leadership at the time, Republicans at that time failed to do it, and they were punished at the ballot box, right? Where Democrats were sent in and ultimately ran Congress for the final 2 years of the first Trump administration. I think we have an opportunity here again where Republicans were put into control to turn the page on a disastrous 4 years of Bidenomics and Bidenflation. And they were voters sent, Republicans.
But do they have a health care plan? Do the Republicans? I'm a Republican, but I don't see them still having a plan. Do you?
Yeah, the president rolled out the great health care plan, and you can go to their website.
That was pretty skimpy. Come on. I mean, that was not really a full plan, was it? It was a few ideas like personal savings accounts, but it wasn't really. Was it a complete plan?
No, I think it's a pretty comprehensive plan. And again, I think there's a lot of work to do there. And I think it's where Republicans, for whatever reason, I can't quite put my finger on it, Phil, fail to really sort of embrace the need to have good messaging on this. I think they can win on it, right? The reason every American's health insurance premiums have gone up over the last decade isn't because of inaction by Republicans or failure by Republicans. In some ways it is because they haven't transformed the system and made a system that's patient focused, but it's because of Obamacare. It's because of the ACA that Democrats put into place that have made Americans' healthcare premiums, both folks on the marketplace and off of the marketplace, have their premiums go up. And I think, that blame is owed squarely on the Democrats and our liberal friends who continue to encourage our country to take the march down that path. But there's also blame to be given to our Republican friends who fail to embrace a plan and go out there and actually drive and message on that plan.
Well, failed to come up with a plan, right? Correct? To have say this is the replacement, right?
Well, again, I think there are, we've had our personal option out there for, I think, about 5 years now and have been educating members of Congress on that. The president, rolled out his great healthcare plan earlier this year, late last year, if I remember correctly. But again, it's an area that I think for some reason, I can't quite put my finger on. So many lawmakers are skittish about really embracing making change on, short of just saying we're gonna work.
Let's talk about that personal option. Correct if I'm wrong. The personal option is kind of like a health savings account. I don't know if they still have those. Kind of you get to put money away that you can then use for your health care. Is that kind of the way it works?
It's one of the pieces of the personal option campaign. Part of it is also price transparency. Part of it is removing barriers that stand in the way of healthcare professionals. COVID, for all the bad and problems that arose out of that, those several years, right? One of the things that we began to recognize that was forever challenging was telehealth visits, where before, in order, if you were sick and you wanted to, get a very simple prescription for the flu, I actually just had this a couple of weeks ago, I would have had to go to my doctor, sit in a waiting room, cough, get other people sick, and 3 hours later get the medication that I knew I needed out of the gate, right? But because of telehealth and the experimentation during the COVID pandemic that showed everybody the world wouldn't burn if patients communicate with their doctors over the phone or Zoom, I was able to get medication just 2 weeks ago that has got me back up and fighting shape.
We're glad to hear you're back on your feet, Donovan. A quick last question about these kind of personal option or health. If I have a health, whatever you want to call it, health savings account, personal option, let's say I put away $40,000-$50,000. Okay. And then I get cancer. Okay. How am I going to get that cancer? It could cost $500,000 or $1 million, right? So what happens in that situation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you still then you need it's a combination of solutions, right? So I think then you also continue to have kind of care and coverage for some of these catastrophic type
Hmm.
situations. But I think for a lot of folks and where they're making their healthcare decisions right now, you can either pay through an employer a $500 a paycheck premium, and with all of that money going to the health insurance company, and you're hoping, fingers crossed, that they're going to approve paying your doctor when you go and have that checkup, or through an HSA you can have a high deductible healthcare plan where you're maybe paying $50 per paycheck, no joke, for your premium, with the other $450, if you so choose, or whatever that amount might be, going into your HSA, money you control, that follows you from job to job wherever you may go, grows
Hmm.
tax free and in a savings account or investment account, and gives you the ability, right, to be in control of your healthcare decisions. I know now what it costs when I've got to take my 10-year-old daughter to a sick visit at the doctor from school, right? Compared to how it used to be, where you didn't know that. But thanks to an HSA, the high deductible healthcare plan, my family, we're in control of our healthcare decision making, and what that enables us to do, right, is see our healthcare costs go a lot lower than some of my friends in the private sector or other jobs, and us again to be growing our healthcare savings for future illness or whatever the Lord may bring our way.
All right, let's move to a subject that I know is very one of your favorites is tax cuts. Okay, because I know that AFP was very active in passing the first Trump tax cuts and then the big beautiful bill, which was also more. My question is this: um, the deficits during the first Trump administration, or I should say, the addition to the national debt was about $7.8 trillion, and after with the big beautiful bill, it's going to add another $4 trillion to our national debt, which is now, I don't know what it is, 38 trillion. I can't even keep track. Is it fiscally, regardless of whether you cut tax, is it really fiscally responsible to pass on that kind of massive debt to our kids and grandkids?
Well, like I say, in Columbus and in Washington, D.C., our problems there aren't a revenue generation problem. In fact, we're putting more money into the federal government's collecting more money in tax revenue now than it was 10 years ago, right? We're at 5.3, I think that's $1 trillion I'm seeing here in tax revenue. Wind this back here just a little bit to 2016, and the federal government was bringing in $3.2 trillion in federal tax revenue. That's with the Trump tax cuts, the working families tax cuts, involved here. The important part here, right, Phil, is when we talk about a tax cut, there's two ways of thinking. Either you believe that's the government's money, which is where our friends who oppose the working family tax cuts and the tax cuts that Columbus has been able to accomplish over the last several years, you believe that's the government's money first, and they're happy, you're lucky to give that to them. Or
But you're talking kind of philosophical here, in fairness, aren't you?
well, no, that's hard
Because
money.
what I'm saying is, you agree that there ought to be some taxes. So I assume on some level, maybe not, but let's assume that. Um, and I've heard you say, Donovan, and that it is not a, what did you say, not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. But I guess what I'm saying is, I can see you guys getting behind either of those bills if you say, all right, guys, you can cut those taxes, but you got to cut equal spending, because you got to admit, all they're doing here is printing money and borrowing money. Now 38, money that we can't even imagine. How do you justify supporting those tax cuts when they're not willing to cut the spending equally?
Well, one of the things that we've done is, President Trump sent a reconciliation package over to Congress early last year to bring down some of that spending. Programs like USAID, defunding these programs that we very clearly said are bogus programs, not worthy of taxpayer dollars. They don't really get to those core functions that you look to the federal government to do. And so what you really need to do is two things. And the working families tax cut does the first one, which is create a great tax policy, right, that incentivizes growth and investment and individuals to be able to keep their money and choose to spend it as they wish. And if they had failed to act, Americans would have seen their taxes go up. I think the average Ohio family would have seen their federal tax bill go up $1,500.
But the debt has also gone up, right? Which is essentially the taxpayer's debt.
Well, which is the other thing we need Congress to do, right? And we need this administration to do, which is continue to push reconciliation packages to cut a lot of that spending, and we need to get back to a normal order of business where we're not doing brinksmanship with the threat of government shutdown every 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it might be, but rather keep the government open, get Congress to reassert its budgeting authority, and start to create budgets that bring our national debt down. Senator John Husted introduced the principled balanced budget amendment um, uh, summer, fall of last year. And what that would do, right, is require Congress, not in 1 year, Phil, but just over a 10-year window. Can we get a budget that will balance out over 10 years, right? To try to find some type of happy medium ground here where we don't have to hope for magic to occur and Congress miraculously start to do its job under the Constitution, but maybe over a window of time begin to have that happen and move towards that way. We didn't get into this hole overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight, but you got to do two things, and it's possible to do them both. Create good economic policy that enables Americans to invest in their businesses, communities, and families, which is the working family tax cut. And then we need them to pass budget bills on time that ultimately rein in the spending and address the national debt.
Am I right that the only president in the last 30 years to pass a balanced budget was Clinton?
Yeah, Clinton, and then John Kasich as the finance chair. If you go
Right.
way back.
I know, John, he played a big role. Real quick, you use the expression starve the beast, okay? Which, the way I see it, works great at the state level because every state requires a balanced budget. But when you talk about starving the beast at the federal level, all you're saying is, we're taking this away. Go ahead and print and borrow more money. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I don't know that I would say starve the beast. I might have at some point, you might have a quote of me there, but I think in this case, part of what we're looking at, right, Phil, is you want to, it's two different things. Again, we want to create the good economic policy. And then the other part that we want to do, right, is really evaluate what should the federal government be doing. Every year, Congress is supposed to pass a budget, right? It's 12 separate bills that they're supposed to send to the president. They'll get started on that again, believe it or not, I think here very shortly for the September 30th deadline. That is the end of the federal fiscal year. And, I think if you do that, right, and you take a good hard look, what is it that the federal government actually needs to be doing? And it's not like it sits on one person's desk, right, to figure out, although the president sends his budget over, OBM sends their budget over. But, you have a large number of members of Congress who sit on multiple committees who vet, work through these processes and send these bills up. So there's an opportunity for these things to be heard. But it really comes down to, do they want to curb spending? Do they want to begin to turn the page on the disastrous effects of multiple decades of deficit spending and growing debt, or do they want to continue down the path that they're going down? I think we've got the opportunity to turn the page there. But again, we're not going to get it done in one Congress. We're not going to get it done in one administration. But that's why organizations like ours exist, right? We have the opportunity to kind of look at the long game and engage at that level.
And speaking of that, you brought up the USAID, just because I know you were a supporter of the Doge cuts.
Mm-hmm.
I heard you just on a podcast say that. And you brought up USAID, which, and I'm taking a guess, you don't have to answer this, but I'm guessing because you were homeschooled, I'm guessing you're like me, a faith-based kind of guy. If you're not, then all right, you get it. So you and I, and all that stuff. All right. Now, the Lancet, which is a very prominent medical journal, estimated that USAID between 2001, 2021 prevented 91 million deaths, including 30 million children because from malaria, AIDS, and that stuff. And the Lancet also modeled a scenario that as a result of shutting it down or throwing it in the wood chipper, as Musk said, that they estimate more than 14 million additional deaths will occur, including 4.5 million children under the age of 5. Now, you and I were both believing in, limited government, all that. I don't say that, but on the faith, we also know that Jesus talked a lot about healing the sick. And putting aside ideology, do you feel comfortable having supported cutting with whatever waste? I'm sure there's a lot of waste, but do you feel comfortable cutting, not just reforming or getting rid of waste, but cutting in a program which, at least according to this, saved 91 million lives over 20 years?
Look, I'm not challenging the validity of those programs or the way that those programs might have helped or harmed people around the world or here in the United States. What I'm challenging is the idea that the American taxpayer needs to be paying for that. one of the problems we've had over the last several years, I think I've got the book up here. Bowling Alone is a good one to get into with this, but it talks about the break in community and how we've moved away from communities actually coming together to solve the problems in society. Get philosophical here just for a minute, right? It's like a muscle that has atrophied. We've got so many folks, so many organizations. As a Catholic, the Catholic Church does this all the time. I know we've got a lot of Christian friends who find their way to the state capitol asking for money when the budget's opened up and it's available for them. And we know it happens on a federal level.
But 90 million preventable deaths, that's an awful big number, isn't it?
Well, where are the faith-based organizations in helping prevent that, though, Phil?
Oh,
that's the point I'm getting.
Totally agree. I mean, I support compassion and back-to-back, and absolutely. But I mean, let's assume the church, shall we say, is not doing its job. I'm perfectly agreeing with that. Nonetheless, USAID,
these community organizations have failed to do that because what they've done is they've outsourced this to the government, right? Whether it's providing health care for the needy, right? They look to Medicaid to provide that. When it's providing women, infants, and children with food, what do? Instead of the faith-based organizations or the community-based organizations or a local social change entrepreneur bringing together donors to solve that problem, they look to WIC to solve it. Programs that are needed, right? Because there are people who are in need of these services. But the problem is that muscle is atrophied. We've allowed in this country that community muscle to atrophy to the point where government plays an outsized role. And so you see that in a very visible way when those taxpayer dollars are not there.
Well, given that those organizations are not doing what they should, I'm 100% with you. Do you feel in good conscience having totally cut, not just revise or reform, totally cut an organization which, at least according to this medical journal, is going to result in 4.5 million kids under age 5 dying and 14 million additional deaths? Is that, I mean, it's fine to say, oh, the church should do it or these organizations. I'm with you on that, but they're not. Do you feel in good conscience it's okay to cut that out and have that many potential deaths?
I just flat out reject that premise that you're putting forward there, honestly. And that the idea is that, government exists for a purpose. It's to provide, in short, right, provide roads so people can transact business and get where they need to go. It's to provide national defense to make sure that our country is safe and secure.
And I agree with that philosophy.
And the problem is our government has grown to a scope to the point where it is involved in every nook and cranny of our lives. It's involved in the lives of others around the world. And the idea here is that we need to get back to some foundational principles that, again, 250 years ago set this nation on its path and its trajectory. Feel for those folks. There's opportunities out there to help address those folks. But I think, and that's the long-term vision that we have as an organization, is that there are other key institutions that are capable and able to solve these problems that do truly exist in society. And if government operates in its proper role, community operates in its proper role, we'll have the ability to actually go solve those problems. But we allow government into too many aspects of our lives at the opportunity cost, the true cost of so many other things that we could be doing.
Okay. You've been very patient. I got about 2-3 more questions. I'll let you go. So I'm not trying to monopolize your time. One of the things that on the AFP list of issues is strong support for law enforcement, particularly to prevent violent crime. After it appeared to me that the president on January 6th incited a mob to attack the Capitol. There were 150 cops that were injured. About 4 or 5 deaths resulted. That seems to me the ultimate example of violence. Did AFP take any kind of stand speaking out about that?
I can't remember what we would have said at the time. I mean, I think you never want to see those kinds of things happen. But as a grassroots organization, right, we're involved in several demonstrations, and we bring folks together to be able to go to the State House. And one of the things that I pride our organization on being able to do, as mentioned at the top of the show here, is there are so many folks who see something on TV, read something in the news, and they get upset and they throw their shoe at the TV and they say, I'm just done. I'm done being involved in the political arena. It's rigged. It doesn't work. And I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna disengage. And what we do is we tell people, actually pick that shoe up off the floor, put it on, get your keys, get in the car, and drive down to an AFP event and join us, because we're going to provide you with an opportunity, right, to make a difference in a meaningful way that will result in change, right? Whether it's coming to the State House to advocate for school choice, or helping prepare your comments for you to testify in a committee on a way regulations or red tape are hurting you and your family or your business. We provide you with that opportunity to make an impact and make a difference in a way that actually gets
A healthier way than smashing the windows of the Capitol. In other words, right?
or whatever you may think is going to be effective. We've got the secret sauce, and it's not too secret to be able to make a difference in your community. That's for sure.
After that attack on the Capitol, there were 147 congressmen who still voted after that to overturn or refuse to certify the election results, even to this day, I have yet to see any evidence that the election was rigged or it would have been any different or any of that. I mean, it appears to be a complete big lie. That's at least how I see it. When those 147 guys went ahead and refused to do that, which I think is an unpatriotic act, was that when AFP was then doing endorsements, did that enter into your consideration that those guys kind of went along with this thing?
I'm not sure where we were in terms of endorsements and factoring that piece in. We look at each one of those races. Each of the races that we'll ultimately engage in or endorse in, right, individually, and sort of identifying if there's a candidate who can make it, who shares our point of view on the policies, will be a policy champion on the things that our grassroots communities are engaged in, and then ultimately kind of evaluate whether we can make a difference, right? If our grassroots folks get involved in advocating for a candidate or engaging, in express advocacy in a community, can they make a difference in that race? And so those are really the areas that we look at, right? Is there a policy champion, and can we make a difference in the race? And that's, that sort of has guided us, I think, in a really healthy way to get behind folks who, at a core level, share the values and beliefs of our grassroots advocates across the state.
Given that you guys, again, support strong law enforcement, did you and you have the ability to communicate to some of these cases, like would you get 1 million phone calls or contacts, which is fantastic on some of these issues. When President Trump pardoned the 1,500 people, many of whom engaged in violent attacks on the police, seems to me that is totally counter to supporting police and law enforcement. Did you guys communicate that to any of your, representatives or people in Washington to speak out against that or the pardons?
I don't recall us taking a public position on that, but again, happy to kind of take a look, and I have to go back in the time machine a little bit to take a look there. I don't recall any what we might have done at that time, though. Sorry.
That's okay. One or two more things. I'm kind of pulling this stuff off of your website, but one of the things I saw is we see renewed calls for the top-down failed ideas and policies of the past: socialism, nationalism, and cronyism. I want to ask you about cronyism because since President Trump took office the second term, this is according to the Wall Street Journal, his family has pulled in $4 billion in proceeds and paper wealth. His company, World Liberty Financial, sold a 49% stake valued at $500 million to investors in the United Arab Emirates. And following that, the Trump administration approved the sale of advanced AI-capable chips to the United Arab Emirates. And the Trump organization at the same time has pursued and licensed Trump-branded golf and real estate projects in the UAE. Isn't that cronyism?
Well, Phil, this is kind of going beyond the range of the issues that I thought we were going to be talking about, so I wasn't really prepared to kind of get into this space. So yeah, if we want to explore this area and bring me back on, I'd be happy to kind of talk through and see if we have anything on that. But we're kind of getting into this question, and the last couple of questions, quite honestly, have been outside of the scope of what I thought we'd be covering, and I was preprepared to talk about here and what we're doing in Ohio.
Well, we will have you back, Donovan. And one of the things I was going to ask you about, think about this, is, while the president was negotiating with Qatar on a lot of defense related matters, they gave him a $400 million plane. Now, it is to be used as Air Force One, but President Trump keeps that when he leaves office, which seems to me to be about as a clear example of cronyism as one could find. But I'll let you look into that, and we'll talk again on that, okay?
Sounds
Unless you
good.
want to comment on it right now. I don't want to act like
No,
gotcha or anything.
no, no,
Okay.
and no, not accusing you of gotcha. Just, yeah, my sense was we're going to talk about the work we're doing here in the state of Ohio. It looks like we're
Okay.
moving more into some of the
Okay.
more
Well,
national issues.
I should have been clear. I apologize for that,
Quite
but
all
you've
right.
held up well. Okay.
Thank
My last question. There are a series of issues that we've talked about, that you've talked about, that are really important to AFP. I would say fiscal, well, cutting taxes and efficient government, things like that. Um, if you have a candidate that meets all your issues criteria, he's right there. But let's say he's a Holocaust denier who blames Jews for economic problems, maybe admires Hitler. So, but he's with you on all your issues. Do you take character into does that enter into your decision, or is it strictly you're with us on the issues? That's all we care about.
No, I think we take character into that, and reason I kind of starting and stopping here a little bit, Phil, is I think that the challenge I have with that premise is that I think in order to be a good champion of the policies that we support, you need to be of good character. And so, when we sit down
But
and
do you
talk,
really? I mean, if you support low taxes and all those kind of things, but you're like a neo-Nazi, why do you have to be of good character if you support those policies?
you'll be ineffective at building a policy majority, right? People will not want to work with you. And so at the end of the day, in
Mhm.
order to get good ideas done, you have to be somebody, whether it's at the State House in Columbus or I imagine on the Hill in Washington, you have to be somebody who other people are willing to work with, or willing to follow and or lead, right? And so at the end of the day, there are plenty of folks I would venture to guess across this country who share similar policy solutions, but are wholly ineffective because of the way that they present themselves and carry themselves. Again, I go back to that point. We can disagree without being disagreeable, right?
Yeah.
We'll work with anyone to do good is another sort of mantra we embrace. But at the end of the day, we want to get that good done, and in order to get that good done, you have to work with folks who are of good character. And again, I think if you truly at a core level believe these ideas of bottom-up solutions, you believe in lowering taxes, you believe in empowering people with freedom and liberty, then at a character level, you're going to be somebody who shares our values, and a lot of that as well.
My last question. It appears from an issue standpoint, President Trump is kind of on board with a lot of your stuff, like the healthcare issues we talked about and cutting taxes. Last week he sent out I guess you call it a meme, where he showed the Obamas, President and Miss Obama, as apes. He also, in the last couple of weeks, has labeled the Somalis as garbage people. And you recall during the campaign, he said that the Haitians up in Springfield near here were eating dogs, which was a lie. That seems like, does that seem like, I mean, it just seems like that's a pretty strong sense of very poor character to use that to describe a former president like an ape, which is a stereotype, for black people and so forth. Does that trouble you, those kind of actions and those kind of words?
Well, I think in general, yeah, there is a civil discourse problem in this country that so many folks, again, I talk about the individual who throws their shoe at the TV or reads something in social media and just decides to disengage from the public arena, right? It doesn't need to be that way. And I think we have the opportunity, right, to, that's sort of the work, that's a large part of the work that we do, right, is empowering folks to say, hey, look, you don't have to, you can disagree with somebody of a different political persuasion, but to dehumanize them or minimize them is unnecessary in order to accomplish the public policy goals or improvements in the community that you want to achieve. And so I think that's it's a challenge we found ourselves in, and we continue to try to elevate the dialogue and everything that we do. and in the engagements that we do. Even though I did mention some of our Democrat friends and even our big spending Republican friends earlier in the segment here, I didn't mean that in a derogatory way towards them.
Well, I'll just say, since it sounds like we share a somewhat of a common faith, I'm what you call a Christ follower or whatever, and it sounds like you're kind of a person of faith as well. I I think I'll just say I think it is very important, whether we're Republican, conservative, whatever, that when that kind of conduct that I just referred to, that kind of name calling and really horrific uh, behavior occurs, I think I'll just say I think we as people of faith need to speak up and condemn it. Uh, so that's I'll leave with that. But let me ask you before we end the interview. I'm sure a lot of people might want to get involved with AFP and specifically AFP Ohio. Tell them where to go to do that and how to get in touch with you and follow you and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that we're grassroots fueled, and so I appreciate you sharing your megaphone with me here today to get to talk through some of the things that we're working on and focused on. You can go to buckeyeblueprint.com though, buckeyeblueprint.com, and you can learn more about the issues that we're working on. And if interested, join us at an upcoming meeting or event in your area.
Well, great. And I have to confess, my ex-wife, who I am on good terms with, formerly, I believe, held your position many back, and so I at least have a little more familiarity with AFP than maybe the average person. Hey, Donovan, you've been very excellent as a spokesperson. Really appreciate your kind of taking a few little pushback questions. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Phil, again, thanks for sharing your megaphone with me. I appreciate it.